Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully it can be found on any podcasting platform that exists, and if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, I'm going to have Brandon joining me from Olde Raleigh. And Olde Raleigh is based just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and they've been around since right after the pandemic. And I've been following them since they first opened their doors. And they've got one of the most beautiful bottles on the marketplace, and they've got some really interesting things going on. I hope you guys enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed the conversation with Brandon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be joining us. Today, I have Brandon McCraney joining me from the Olde Raleigh Whiskey Company, brand, distillery, whatever you want to call it, out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Actually, out of Zebulon, but close by to Raleigh. So I've had the pleasure of kind of following your brand for a handful of years because the company I work for is close by, and so I've kind of kept my eye on it. And then you reached out to me a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, I'd love to come on and talk about things. And I said, perfect. I would love for you to do that. So there's a lot of folks in the area that probably in your area that probably know the story of Olde Raleigh, but maybe the kind of the external reaches of the United States may not know it. Brandon, go ahead and kind of just give me an introduction on you, your brand, and what you have going on.
Yeah, thank you, John. A pleasure to be on today. Yeah, my name is Brandon McCraney. I'm the owner and the whiskey blender at Olde Raleigh. We are located just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, family owned and operated. So we did this the old-fashioned way, just saved up 15, 16 years. We had to chase my dream, which is blending whiskey from around the world. And luckily, I've got a supportive wife and family that's allowed me to do some crazy things that we've happened over the last few years. Yeah. So yeah, we blend a lot here is what we do. Original intent was to be a distillery, not a blending operation, but we've got thrown quite a few curveballs along the way. I took the leap and bought a building in 2019 with the intent, according to our construction schedule, to be open April 2020. Which is right when COVID happened. So my timing was ridiculously awful. We didn't open until the following January 2021. But if you were in the construction industry back in the day, it was kind of business as usual, minus some logistical supply chain issues. And what happened to us was our county, the inspectors that approved a design, once we started constructing it, they proceeded to make us change virtually everything that they had approved in that design. The dilemma that created for me was I got an SBA loan, small business loan, tied to a design for construction that they had approved. So once they started making me change things, we went through our construction money, all of our contingency money for the project, then all of our process piping for the stills, which I'd purchased in 2018. And then I had to wipe out my 401k or life savings to make sure we opened the third week of January during COVID 2021. So with those curveballs given, the original intent me as a blender was I was going to train a staff to distill our own distillate whiskey. And then that would be old enough at some point for us to blend our own. But when I was throwing all those curveballs, it really forced me to double down and just start networking around the country, securing barrels, very small numbers, onesies, twosies. And when you're talking about that quantity back then, many people didn't want to give you the time of day. I was able to claw and find a couple of sources, and we just started releasing some batches. Our twist on what we do is we don't replicate any batch we ever make. And we were off to the races. So I was just trying to give you a quality product, but I want to showcase how I can make that same bourbon mash bill recipe pop differently from batch to batch. As we were trekking along, the intent was to cut those stills on. They're still here. We've got, the cooling tower, the chiller, the everything we have, and the chill water complete. We just needed to complete the steam piping. And that is when the market started to shift a little bit, which you're starting to see. During COVID, though, you couldn't make bourbon quick enough or whiskey quick enough, right? And so I think a lot of people took note of that and wanted to jump in on this tsunami of this surge that we had. And the challenge with that, I had folks spent 10, 20, $30 million on facilities, colleagues of mine in the industry. But the challenge when you're talking about whiskey is you make today what the world needs 4 or 5 years from now. So last year you started to see this trend change, and that's when I started getting a lot of phone calls from folks saying, well, Brendan, you seem to really like blending and you're pretty good at that. Why don't you just focus on that?
Hmm.
And at first I went, that's nuts. I've got these stills. But then I had this come to Jesus meeting with myself, and I said, well, what do I love to do? I mean, my craft is blending, and blending that art is completely different than being a distiller, completely different. And at that point, we have 11 different sources now that we pull from for whiskey. So I made the decision about over a year ago now that we're not going to focus on distilling. We're a blending operation, and that's what we're all about, Olde Raleigh whiskey.
So you said kind of at the beginning of that, you said you scrimped and saved over time to be able to kind of bring this passion into a reality. What did you do before this, right? Because you didn't come in from the whiskey industry specifically, right? As a generational thing, and North Carolina has a very rich distilling history that has sort of been forgotten in the last 20 or 30 or maybe 40 years at this point. And so it wasn't exactly, I guess, maybe a hotbed for distilling at the time you were doing it. Like, how did you come to this? Like, how did you scrimp and save?
So had you told me 25 years ago I'd be doing this, that's not within the cards. Let's just say that. It's one of those things where it started out as a hobby on the side.
Mhm.
I was that guy 15 years ago that had that elaborate bourbon collection in his office back when it wasn't a cool thing. He was like, this guy, but I got really fascinated with just the nuances of how you can have that same whiskey taste differently, the mash bill, or whether it's on one floor of a rickhouse versus another. And that just led me to just start picking up knowledge. And then I'd pick up different skill sets along the way. But it didn't start out as I knew this is what it was going to be. I was in the military out of college, acquisitions officer, which is weapons development for the Air Force.
Mhm.
And then I did the corporate gig for, I think about 12, 13 years while this thing was kind of growing on the side and what turned into a snowballed its way down a hill and just turned into this giant thing that I say, let's jump on it and take the leap. But I think along the way, those skill sets in the corporate world, my previous position, I helped them start a division. And when we scaled it and I ran the Southeast for a part of a division, all those tools I needed as I've learned in starting this. So they positioned me and prepared me to take the leap when I decided that I wanted to start a whiskey company. And that was 2019.
Yeah.
Well,
And so
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, you're fine. So you mentioned in the course of that first answer that you're sourcing from 11 different locations, and the last thing I had looked at or dug up was it was like 5 different states, 11 sources, and that's somewhat of an unconventional kind of sourcing map or concept, because a lot of folks may source from 1 or 2, but they kind of look at this. What's the philosophy behind all of these options? And I think I know the answer to it, but I want to make sure everybody else hears the same thing that I think it is.
So with Olde Raleigh, what we want to give you and be known for is giving you a quality whiskey. Whiskey tasting, you and I are going to come to the table, and it's going to be a subjective experience because we've got different baggage and different blind markers in our tasting buds and cuisines that we enjoy. So what's going to pop off differently or what you enjoy might be different than what I enjoy. But what we can both agree on, I think, is when you're trying a whiskey, I like a nice oily whiskey that coats the tongue.
Mhm.
Right. So that's one that we can agree on. And that for us at Olde Raleigh, that's our qualifier for selecting any barrel that we decide to harvest is, does it give you that nice mouthfeel, little complexity to it, but I want something nice and oily on the tongue. So when you talk about bringing in new source providers, I kind of view it as, it's like building out a bouquet of flowers, right? So you have some barrels that are going to give you more volume in that bouquet. And then some of those barrels are just going to give you some accents. Maybe it's a pop up front, or one's got this long, slow burn on the finish that just kind of grows into a crescendo, right?
Mhm.
And the art of blending is about, okay, this gives me this element. This gives me this element. How do I layer these on top of one another to create something where, the sum is greater than its individual parts? So that's kind of how I view bringing in additional sources in building our small batch and our barrel proof. So
Mhm.
right now we've got 9 different recipes that we use for our small batch bourbon and our barrel proof bourbon. And so I kind of relate those 2 products is similar to, if you go down to Mexico, you got these family style restaurants where they make a sauce called a mole. Those moles are made in the same pot for generations, and they've been pulling from that same pot 30, 40 years. They never fully deplete it. And so that's how I view our batches. We're just going to keep adding more complexity, different whiskeys that complement one another. and just continue to grow the brand that way.
Yeah, and I like that bouquet concept. It's something I haven't heard someone else use before. So hold on to that. That's a really interesting thing because you've got certain things that are like the baby's breath that sort of fill out and create some space, and then you've got tulips and roses, and they all play a different role to make this beautiful thing. So you've got all these different distilleries that you're purchasing liquid from, and so that gives you different recipes. But do you also play with barrels as well, whether they be different cooperages or different char levels or different, secondary aging barrels? Is that another component in your recipe creation?
Oh, for sure. We have different casks from all over the world that we use. I think we have 14 different cask finishes that we work with barrel brokers that reach out to estates from around the world. And if I see something that would be interesting, then we'll bring it in. A lot of what we do, believe it or not, Olde Raleigh is, if I had a bunch of investors, they would say half the stuff I'm doing is nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But because a lot of it is just me exploring curiosities as a blender and trying to package different flavor components together. So we released a 5 cask finish whiskey last year, a bourbon blended whiskey that I think we only did 150 bottles,
Mm-hmm.
but we brought in 5 different casks around the world. I'm looking to do over a 10 cask finish here very soon because I just love experimentation. So yeah, we do a lot of cask finishes. On our small batches, we've got a 130-year-old oak that had died over near the distillery, and we had a woodworksman basically cut that thing up, turn it into staves, and we'll char it up and rest it with some of our batches, just to give it a taste of home into the
Mm-hmm.
batching tank and have our own little spin on local with the product. But yeah, quite a bit.
So you mentioned you have a small batch, you have a barrel proof. I would assume, and I may be wrong here, but some of these cask finishes are going to be more along the lines of LTOs, and I guess it's a little bit of a hard thing to use when talking about Old Raleigh because you are running on a vintage concept where what is bottled today may be different than what's bottled next year. They're just going to be good. There's going to be some common through lines, but I would assume that cask finishes are. Do you have any of those that are kind of like repeat finishes that you're going to do over time, or are they all just kind of experiments?
So we have some repeatable ones that we do. The honey cask finished bourbon. We're on to our 10th batch of that. Never meant to make that more than once. It just keeps selling out. And North Carolina has a humongous beekeeping community, which I didn't know. And so that just kind of took its course, and I just jumped along for the ride, and happy to keep that going. We've got a coffee cask finished bourbon, same thing that we release in the fall. A lot of our other one-offs we've got a bottle club that anybody around the country can sign up for. It's called the Olde Raleigh Whiskey Society. And so I offer classes and experiences. And if you're out of state, you get a bottle every month. You just sign up. There's no commitment. And if you like that cask finish, then it shows up. If you're out of state, every quarter, we do quarterly shipments. And so what last month was a 25-year hazmat whiskey at 140 proof that was finished for a year and a half in Pellicotado sherry casks.
Uh-huh.
And I think we yielded, 135 bottles or something like that. But I use that particular club as an outlet for me and to have a lot more creativity and experimentation. It's when you talk about, I don't even call it nano batching, it's custom order is what it is.
Right.
But in doing that, folks sign up that month. I know at the end of the month, all right, I've got 140 bottles to make. Boom. I don't have to worry about distribution, all the marketing that comes with that. It's just this group gets something very unique and rare. And then I'll move on to the next project the following month.
So I think, tell me a little bit about this, this cask that you have coming out, Olde Stogie, I think is a cask that you guys have coming out here pretty quick.
Yeah, Olde Stogie, that's our cigar bourbon. It's a bourbon finished in Armagnac and Tawny Port casks. So we cascade that. We release it once a year, approximately 1,000 bottles, and we cascade a little over a year, I should say. Now, this will be our 4th release on this particular product. We call this a cigar blend because it's designed to complement a cigar, but in exploring casks that we want to utilize with this, I think the most popular I'd seen out there was a cognac. You see a lot of folks with sifters of cognac when they're smoking a cigar, but I've always been a big fan of Armagnac out in France. So we packaged that with a Tawny Port, and it's I think our most acclaimed products. We had a competition in 2023, international competition, where they called us the best micro distiller in the U.S., which is a great honor. But the humorous part about all these things that we had won in that event. I didn't even know it was something you could win. My motivation for submitting that product at that international competition was just to get a report card on how I'm doing as a blender, because
Mhm.
I'm in rural North Carolina and a lot of the prominent blenders are in Scotland. And I just, how am I doing against, the folks that
Right.
started it all? And, that product, to our surprise, did very, very, very well. So,
So, is there, and I like that you're doing Armagnac, because that is a spirit that I think is probably doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, at least the United States, and specifically in the Southern United States. We're heavy whiskey fans and we like bourbon a lot, but there's something about it that parallels a little more for me than cognac does. But do you have a particular brand you work with, or do you just pick up whatever barrels are available and then kind of finish off in that? And I know you can't necessarily tell me what brand, maybe, but do you
yeah,
like to try to stick with one, or do you have multiple brands that are a part of your finishing process?
I've only stuck to one. I can't disclose. That's a barrel
Yeah.
broker thing. I think in the future, though, we
Mhm.
will have someone that I can talk about. I was in Paris in February, potential looking to export. One of my motivating factors was to find a family owned and operated Armagnac estate, and I've been in touch with one since I've left, where we can tell their story here and conversely they tell our story there.
Mhm.
But it was important for me to have an owner operator. I love that kinship and just mutual respect. If you're in the trenches and you understand each other, then you're more inclined to want to support and help one another out.
And it feels like it could probably bring significant more innovation as well, because you're moving from a transactional to an actual relationship.
Yeah.
And so they have a barrel that finishes up and they're like, this one's really, really unique. It may not be the one that you want to put into your Olde Stogie, but there may be a special thing for it. Whereas barrel broker says, I've got 15 barrels, here's what you've got, and you get to work with it. And so uh, it feels like a good kind of synergy that exists, especially when you're talking about finishing. Now, you've mentioned a number of times measuring yourself against the blenders of Scotland, right? And the phrase blending in the United States has been a little bit different than the way it is kind of revered in Scotland. At what point did you identify like that's the mentality I want to chase down versus kind of what we have historically done here in the States?
Yeah. I think it was along the way in this journey. It's, when you get started, sometimes you need your life experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, till you realize who you are and what you're comfortable with. And so when I first started, I thought, well, in order to be, to really have a solid reputation and what have you, I need to make my own stuff. And so I've got evidence of that all over this distillery, piping that's disconnected and everything. But I thought I needed that validity, But as we moved along, it's me getting more comfortable in my own skin, understanding this industry, this industry is so big about marketing, that what goes on behind the scenes, if the community only knew. Um,
Mhm.
owning that and say, I'm a blender. I don't replicate anything we make. And if that's for you, great. If it's not, guess what? There's 1,000 other options out there. And you know
Mhm.
what? Please support them. But I'm blessed enough to own 100% of the company that I have. I'm blessed enough to make all of the creative decisions. And I'm blessed enough to have a customer base that's been supporting us.
Mhm.
So I feel like I'm doing it the right way.
But
Again, along the way, if it's not for you, hey, it's all good.
yeah, and at least I think it's starting to change here in the United States, but we had a reverence for the master distiller, and the blender was just kind of a thing that sort of happened. And you said it early on that distilling and blending are two very, very different roles, whereas 15 years ago they were the same person doing both things, and you either had a person who was really good at blending and had to learn distilling, or a person who was really good at distilling and had to learn blending, and that doesn't always lead to maybe the best results. Or you want the right person for the right job at the right time always, but our European counterparts have always had a high reverence for both roles, but a higher reverence for the blender than we've historically had here. So it's good to see it. And there's several companies that are leaning into that, right? I
Mhm.
don't have to have volumes of distillation capacity. And honestly, with the way the market's changing, and I've talked to a number of smaller brands who source only, it's probably a really good business model right now because barrel prices are coming down and you don't have the overhead of what you invested and laid down that you may never get to use because you created way more than you needed 3 years ago because that's what the market was telling you to do. But the concept of vintages and blends feels like a thing that's starting to catch on in North America. So I think you're kind of riding into a wave of people's attention that makes sense. The The process that you have right now, and you mentioned this a minute ago, you've got this 130-year-old oak tree that you rest with some barrels as a stave. In a world where there's a lot of marketing gimmickry, what does this actually do? Like, there is some impact. We know there's going to be some impact, but what does it do for the ones that you use it with?
So it could minimal impact, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and it depends on time in the tank. So
Mm-hmm.
when we blend, for example, we don't rush anything here. So if you were to
Mm-hmm.
come to Old Raleigh, I'll let you know if you're a Six Sigma consultant watching this, I'm your worst nightmare. Okay. We have no machinery equipment. It's everything done by hand. We
Mm-hmm.
blend by hand. We got paddles for blending. We
Okay.
bottle by hand. We label by hand. When we dump and create our batches or our various products, we let them rest in the tank for, it could be upwards of 3 months, let them that.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time is where we'll put some of those staves in there. Again, minimal impact, but a small nuance could go a long way when you're talking about a complexity on a whiskey. And it also depends on what barrels I dumped in there, right?
Right.
So, and what I'm looking, to ultimately be the goal of harvesting that particular, let's say our small batch, which will start at barrel proof, and then we'll slowly reduce the proof with RO water over the course of several weeks to get down to 93 proof. During that process, what it tastes like at 120 proof, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
taste differently as it starts to drop down, as you start to take the mic away from the fire. You got all these lighter, more delicate notes looking to sing. So my job is to say, okay, do I like what's being sung? And if I do, we'll continue down that path. And if not, I can do some other blending techniques or
Mm-hmm.
bring in some other barrels to drive us in a different direction.
I'd read about you kind of taking things over a long period of time from 118 proof, say, down to 93. That feels like it's going to be nerve wracking because you may start proofing it down. You get to 110 and you may think, like, this is perfect. Does it make you like nervous to keep kind of proofing down to 93 and saying, this is really, really good right here? Will it stay good as I proof it down?
I'd say what helps with that is putting in a lot of reps. So I
Uh-huh.
would say in 2021, 2020, yeah,
Hmm.
I was pretty nervous. I've put in enough reps here to where
Hmm.
I've got to just like anybody at home, you get more
Hmm.
experience with your craft. You're going to feel a lot more comfortable with, all right, I've been here before. I know it's going to push down this way right here, and I'm going to be happy with it. But yeah, there were some growing pains for sure, for sure.
And how did you settle at 93 as your proof for that line?
So I don't like to filter anything. I'm gonna wait, like our small batch and our barrel proof has some 21-year-old bourbon in there. I'm gonna wait 21 years to harvest a bourbon. Last thing I want to do is start stripping out flavor components, which is what filtration does. So we've got a metal grate that we capture all of the large pieces of char, and then from there, that's where we keep it. So 93 proof is the lowest proof that we can bring down a whiskey to where if without filtering it, if you were to add water and ice, it wouldn't get cloudy. So that's where we're at 93 proof. Now you'll see a lot of the big brands, they go down to 90 proof where they do that cold filtration cycle. Why? To polish it up. That way, if they added ice and water, it wouldn't get cloudy. I don't want to do that. I don't want to filter.
And it's a strong encouragement. Just you don't have to use ice and water. You can just drink it straight. But for folks that are enjoying vintages, they're also aware that if they do ice it down and it gets cloudy, it's not a sign of anything being bad. It's just a sign of not as much filtration, which a lot of us appreciate. Less filtration that's there for your barrel proof. What is your barrel proof? I guess
In terms of,
for the barrel proof line that you put out. Do they
so
vary for each one, or do you use just like we have some folk? Well, I guess maybe reframe. Let me reframe that. I've talked to some folks that they have what it went into the barrel at, and that's what they consider barrel proof. So if it's 120 is what they went into the barrel at, they'll proof it down to 120 for their barrel proof that they sell. And then you have some folks that say whatever it comes out of the barrel at in that blend, that's going to be my barrel proof. I guess which of those philosophies are you at?
yeah, it's whatever comes out of the barrel on the
Yeah.
back end.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think our latest one was on 118 proof. We used, what was it, 9 different recipes, 4 different grains total in it. And the barrels range from 4 to 21 years old, blended together.
And when you say 4 grains, are any of them kind of non-standard grains, or what do you normally expect of barley and corn and rye and whatever your fourth happens to be?
Yeah, wheat. Yep.
Wheat. Okay.
So of the 4 recipes, what is it? Excuse me. Of the 4 grain, it's, what is it? 4 of the mash bills were corn, barley, and rye. 2 of the mash bills were corn, barley, and wheat.
So when you go ahead, when you go to kind of build a blend, and I usually ask this if anybody who does blending, do you kind of start off with an architecture in mind, I'd like to hit these 3 or 4 or 5 flavor profiles? Or do you sample barrels and then say, okay, I think I can do this particular setup and get there? I guess what's your philosophy on how you build a blend?
So if you were to come to Olde Raleigh, if you've been to a distillery, they got giant rick houses, big warehouses just full of barrels. Come to Olde Raleigh, our back barrel area, I call that our pantry. And so think of like a chef in the back in the kitchen, and the individual barrels are my spice rack in my pantry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to hand select these barrels. It could be a full barrel. It could be as small as a couple ounces, depending on the project I'm working on. And so what we're trying to do is how do we package some of these together to give you something unique? And then ultimately we'll start small and then work our way larger into a 350-gallon tank.
So when you build a blend, do you have a kind of a blending panel or group of people that you sort of validate, like, this is really good? Or have you kind of gotten far enough in your skill set that you're like, I know it's good, I don't necessarily need validation from 3 or 4 or 5 people?
Yeah, so when we release a product, that's my judgment day. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Which the Facebook bourbon groups aren't shy to tell the world how they feel about anything, right?
Right.
But I make whiskey that I enjoy to drink. And so it's a one-person panel essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's how we build it out. And I learned quickly once we released the product how it's received.
And how long does it normally take you to kind of finalize your blend? You start the process for a vintage and then you go to bottle. I know you said earlier, you just like when things are done is when they're done, but then there's also kind of like market entry points that you're trying to hit for timelines and whatnot. Do you have kind of a maximum timeline, or you just like, until it's done?
Yeah, I harvest things based off of flavor profile development. So you rarely hear at Olde Raleigh, it's coming out in 4 months. It's when it's ready, it's ready.
Mm.
And I learned that from our first Olde Stogie release. The Olde Stogie bourbon finished in Armagnac and Tawny Port casks. When I put that bourbon in the barrel and I just let it rest, the Armagnac started to show, but around that 8th month, the Armagnac, the complexities of it just unfolded into the bourbon. And it did that because I didn't rush the process. And so for me, that was a learning moment for me. Was, this is the frustrating part about whiskey, but also the beautiful part about whiskey. Sometimes good things just take a lot of time. And so if you want to rush it, you can, but maybe you're not going to get the best version of what you're trying to make. So we let that one go an additional 6 months. I do that with a lot of our cask finishes. The small batch, the first one, I took 3 months with it. Why? Because, I was a tasting panel of one. The second, you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Mm-hmm.
So you're second guessing yourself. And, but at some point you just have to pull the trigger and say, this is it.
So you've got the Olde Stogie, which is a cigar blend. You have a coffee finish. You have a honey finish. How did you develop? Like, how did Olde Stogie become a thing? Did you just decide, I like smoking cigars, I want to make a whiskey for it? And sort of the same thing, coffee and honey is not, I won't say common, but more well known. Coffee is not, and cigar is starting to kind of pick up. So did it just come to you? Do you like, how do you get to these unique concepts that you want to build out?
Yeah. So some of them were, like the honey. I've been doing that for over 4 years now. The only one really you had like Jack Daniel's honey and was it Wild Turkey honey, but that's
not, those are more liqueur based.
Yeah.
When I think honey, I think more along the lines of what Belle Meade was doing years and years and years ago.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Back then, the only one that was like on the map was the Stinger from Belle Meade.
Yeah.
And I liked their brand. I like when I used to fly into Nashville for my previous job, I love going through the airport because once you got through security, they always had a store that had some different cask finishes of Belle Meade. So I'd always pick up 2 or 3 bottles. But that's what I knew was in the back of my mind. It wasn't until I met the beekeepers at a farmer's market and they had 8 different varieties of honey. And I grew up growing up, local grocery store was like a Food Line. So that $1.50 plastic barrel Food Line, that's what I thought was honey, which is like liquid. So when they had me try these different types of honey, it just kind of blew my mind, similar to how whiskey can be radically different. And that's what started the process of a honey cask finished bourbon. But again, it was just, I wanted to learn about beekeeping. I'll do this once. I think we did 300 bottles and I went, that was fun, but it sold out. And same thing happened with the Olde Stogie. I did the product. I did a release. I said, that was fun. And then it sold out. We won that award. And I went, well, hell, I think I need to listen to my customers. Let's make it again. That's how some of these have evolved. It was just, I'm curious as an artist making whiskey. I present it to the customers and they give me feedback. And then if it's good feedback, well, as a business person, you're going, okay, well, you might want to do more of that, Brandon, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, the market will tell you a lot of things, and that's always great. And cigar brands are picking up a lot of popularity, and they are selling through pretty quickly. And I think they'll stick around because they span a couple of different markets. Your cigar folks and your whiskey folks are basically the same people. They just found a different interest, and sometimes they cross over with each other. Like the cigar folks, wine folks, coffee folks, whiskey folks, beer folks, they're all the exact same type. They just have a different thing that they like to ingest, and oftentimes it cross over. Thinking, with these cask finishes, and this may feel like a dirty word to you, and you tell me if you disagree, but they also lend themselves into some really high end kind of cocktail creations, right? Like, do you guys look at that from a perspective whenever you think about your tasting room and you think, I've got this release, but I can also make this really phenomenal XYZ? I'm making a gold rush out of the honey finish, bourbon or whatever. Like, is that a part of your business process as well?
Candidly, as a blender, no.
Mm-hmm.
That said,
Yeah.
we do have a tasting room, and my staff and Christy's our tasting room manager makes a phenomenal, I mean, an absolutely outstanding cocktail menu.
Mhm.
And that is where I give her creative control. So I say, look, here's my whiskey, here's the tasting notes. And then that where her as a bartender, as a mixologist, that's where I give her creative freedom, is to say, okay, I'd add some bitters here, some liqueurs here, this garnish,
Mhm.
etc. So that's where they get to have a little creativity, is complementing what I'm presenting.
That feels dangerous, having two creatives kind of meet on a single thing. That can get out of hand, especially when, like, this is my thing and this is my thing. But it usually results in a really fantastic end solution, right? Whenever you have folks that are working on these things together. I think about, you've talked a lot about bourbon. Do you have any interest or expectation to move into other spirits, whether it be rye or single malts or anything else, or do you just say, we're a bourbon company?
So whiskey, yeah, I'd
Mhm.
say we're sticking to whiskey.
Gotcha.
I'm a one trick pony. That's all I drink. So I want to
Mhm.
make what I'm going to drink. We have ventured into rye. We've got a Savage rye whiskey actually that we had released. It's at 124 proof. We release that right now once a year. We've got some blended whiskey, some light whiskey, rye whiskey. Haven't mentioned the single malt yet, but I'm starting to see more of that coming of age. I
Mhm.
think I've been asked customers, hey, are you going to jump into this? The reason I haven't jumped into this is that the challenge when you talk about single malt is that it's not going to taste like bourbon,
Right.
and it's not going to taste like scotch. It's going to taste like a North Carolina single malt. And so anytime you do that, you're going to have to educate the consumer. And when you have to educate the consumer on a product type, it's going to take some time
Mhm.
to catch on and be established. I'm looking forward to the day, hopefully 10, 20 years from now, that we're going to come together and be like, you're going to have a glass of whiskey and be like, wow, this is a North Carolina single malt. Oh,
Right.
wow, this is a Washington single malt. I think we're going to get there.
Mhm.
Texas already has that. It's a single malt whiskey scene is phenomenal.
Mhm.
But they also aren't in the backyard of bourbon country. Right?
Right.
They're uniquely Texas, like we're Texas. So they want to
Mhm.
make their own whiskey and they're proud of it, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think there's some West Coast states that are leaning in and starting to develop what their single malt is. Virginia is making a strong claim at what theirs is, but I agree with you that we still don't know what it's going to be in each individual state, and you can only educate so many people on so many things as a brand, right? Like you are Old Raleigh, and you're doing a lot of unique finishes, and so you're already having to educate people on what does tawny port do to bourbon for a person who's only drank bourbon ever, right? That's a new environment for them to have to learn. So I think it makes sense to kind of be that way. So you have a tasting room. I think I'm right. This is in Zebulon. Is that correct?
Yep, just east of Raleigh.
And so is this the tasting room? Is that a place where you can go and you can taste what you guys have as well as purchase bottles, or is it a tasting bar type environment only?
Yeah, so full functioning bar, they sample all of our products and purchase bottles. Actually,
Mhm.
the function of a tasting room is to sell bottles
Right.
in our state. But yeah, we've got right when you walk in, the Stills, which is now the most expensive art exhibit in Zebulon, North Carolina, sitting there right when you walk in. We've got a bar. We
Mhm.
sell craft beer, wine, cocktails,
Mhm.
whole selection of bourbon, and then even some of our sold out releases are available
Mhm.
as flights as well.
Yeah, and I wasn't entirely sure because I know North Carolina is a control state, and that always does some kind of wacky thing with how when you're trying to sell alcohol. Did you kind of bump up against any of North Carolina's laws? Because it had kind of lost its distilling identity and was starting to be built. It's starting to be built back again, but sometimes laws lag behind the market, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, So North Carolina is known as being in the Bible Belt.
Mm-hmm.
And where they gained that reputation was this state was like the women's Christian or temperance movement, Christian League, all that. In the early 1900s, they were incredibly effective in shutting down the distillation community well before Prohibition. So, I mean, this is the genesis of NASCAR, right? So people still drank. So that's when they went underground and driving around in cars. And that's why North Carolina is the home of NASCAR. They were well ahead of the curve. And when Prohibition happened, it just continued the death of distillation here. What folks don't think about is when they repealed Prohibition, yes, you could start making it again, but you needed to have legislation in place to allow for those communities to flourish. And unfortunately, in North Carolina, that really didn't start to happen until less than 15 years ago. And that was just the beginning. In 2019, when I purchased our building, the only thing you could have done in our tasting room was I could give you a sample pour, and then I could sell you up to 5 bottles per calendar year. And when I sold you those bottles, I'd have to write down your driver's license number and keep logs of how many bottles I sold you. So if I oversold you, North Carolina come in and strip our license. So that is why in 19 originally, I wasn't going to do this full time. I said, well, I can't make a living off this. Right before we closed, the distilleries got together, hired a lobbyist, and they helped insert some legislation that ultimately passed, notably eliminated the number of bottles in a tasting room you could purchase. And then 2, if you're a distillery, you can essentially be a full functioning bar, have a mixed beverage, a wine, and a beer permit. And it just so happens where I'm at in Zebulon, North Carolina, there was nothing around here. And I just did some math and got on my knees and begged my wife to let me do this full time. And she luckily told me yes.
Yeah. And it's funny to talk about kind of post-prohibition problems. The county that I live in Kentucky was still dry until 2001 and went fully, well, let me take that back. The county is still dry. The city within our county, the main seat in our county went a restaurant referendum in 2001 and then full package sales in 2011, right? And so I mean, hell, there's a big international whiskey brand in Tennessee that's in a dry county where they make most of their whiskey, and folks can learn about that on their own. But it's unique to see how it's impacted the industry long term, as we saw this boom of whiskey across the United States, where we went from a couple hundred craft distilleries to a couple thousand craft distilleries in about a 10-year time frame. And there were a lot of archaic laws that had to be kind of caught up. Do you have, using a name like Olde Raleigh, it has some very nostalgic vibes to it. Are you going to stick with the Olde Raleigh brand, or do you see kind of a revival of some historic brands and labels and thoughts for the state of North Carolina, because it does have such a rich background?
For us, no. I mean, funny part about Olde Raleigh is, 1, we're not old, but 2, there's actually a neighborhood in Raleigh called Olde Raleigh, and I always just loved it. And Raleigh's home for us, our family. That's originally when I bought the stills, we were trying to be in Raleigh. And so the challenge with that was, 1, it's one of the hottest real estate markets in the country. 2, I didn't want to be backed by investors. And 3, when I met with the city and I said, I want to bring in barrels of whiskey from around the world, they'd interpreted that as, you want to bring in a lot of highly flammable liquid, put it in one building, be in an industrial park. So I spent 2 years just finding all the wrong locations around Raleigh. And so I said, okay, this just isn't working. And that's when I ventured around the suburbs. And luckily I found a suburb that was very supportive of what I was doing and my vision was going to help them revitalize the growth of their downtown.
Do you ever envision having a tasting room in Raleigh proper at some point?
I do. Yeah. That'd be a great thing. Just has to be the right fit.
Yeah, the right fit, and maybe some regulation change, right? Or at least a change in the heart of, hey, here's all of this flammable liquid in this one location. I understand. Yeah, that I often kind of joke about that. I mean, we're really just kind of hanging out with a whole bunch of flammable gas in our houses on a regular basis.
Well, I've got a good friend that now works in that department, and he spoke recently to me. My project got brought up at some point, I guess, within their department, and his takeaway to me was, Brandon, sometimes it's just not good to be the guinea pig. So next go around, maybe won't be so bad for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can lean in for you are the oldest distillery in Zebulon, period, right? So that you can hang on to that. You mentioned earlier the Whiskey Society. Kind of give me, I guess, dive into that a little bit more so folks who aren't necessarily in Raleigh can kind of better understand if they wanted to participate in it. What does it mean? How did it get started? And what does it do for them?
Sure. Yeah. So the Olde Raleigh Whiskey Society is essentially a whiskey club, a whiskey bottle club. So if you're into trying unique whiskeys, rare whiskeys, and you like stuff custom, things custom made for you. We live in a world full of mass production and marketing and look, there's nothing wrong with that. But
Mhm.
if you're looking for something to where you really want to pop open the hood and learn about how whiskey's made and meet the maker, and we offer experiences and we do things, online and what have you, and something that you're not going to get anywhere else, not in stores, and not even in our tasting room. This is truly made just for you. Then that might be for you. It started as a grassroots thing. We really don't talk about it much. I'm
Mhm.
horrible about it, but it's just been this grassroots thing that's grown. I got
Mhm.
a great community. We got members all over the country now. And I think they just appreciate the fact that something's being made custom for them. And I offer a little bit of a background on how the various cask finishes were made and the story behind all of that. And it just seems to resonate with some folks. And that's for you. Well, hey, I'll maybe we'll have a link in here or something they could check it out.
Yeah. There are several brands across the United States that are doing this whiskey society or whiskey club concept. And they've got a lot of different implementations. Some of the larger brands were doing it and then have sort of backed out of it now, right? And I guess, if you're the size of some of the large brands, it becomes a big piece of overhead. Is yours like is there a monthly fee or is it an annual fee or is there just, how does it mechanically function, I guess?
Yeah, so there's no commitment on it, monthly
Mhm.
fee. I think it's $139 a month. And then I've been very active on just getting feedback from the members. Like one of them
Mhm.
said, "Hey, I'm kind of, you know, I'm getting burnt out with all subscriptions and stuff like that. Can you
Mhm.
do an annual fee and just give us a discount?" I went, "Yeah." So we offer an annual. I think that's $400 off if you want
Mhm.
to do it annually. So I think 20% of our members took that approach. So a lot of flexibility on it, but yeah, no commitment. I think if you do month to month, every 6 month is free. And you get
Mhm.
swag every 3 months, member exclusive swag. We just introduced a bomber jacket. Everybody wanted a bomber jacket. So we had this
Mhm.
custom leather bomber jacket made with our logo, and we're about to roll that out. But that's all just been the members building the community.
Right.
And then me as the leader of it, just what
Mhm.
do you want to do? We'll go down this path. Yeah, let's go.
Do you have you thought about putting a cap on membership and saying, "Okay, we're gonna grow to this number, and then we're kinda done because that's what we can sustain," or is it just you figure that out when you get there?
So I think right now my cap would be 200 if
Mhm.
I had to do one today. And
Yeah.
then it would just be about planning. Can I get up to 250, 300? What I don't want to do is what we're not going to do is overextend ourselves. So
Mhm.
with it, I also need to plan, we're doing unique cask finishes and those take
Mhm.
months to develop. It's a combination, it's kind of an art of that. It's if I know we're approaching 200, okay, I need to start supporting that with another cask and stuff.
So, I think through the course of this conversation, you're a solo operator for the blending process. You have to do some work for the tasting room. You have a whiskey club. You do a lot of education, and I'm sure you're out in the market. How do you have all the time?
Well, I tell folks this, I don't think about how many hours I work a week. It's a
Mhm.
lifestyle.
Mhm.
This I was just talking to somebody earlier, when's your off day? I went, I don't have off days. But I don't, that's not a bragging thing either. Brandon could do better, I'm sure. But
Mhm.
also, I love what I do. I've got friends that have tons of hobbies. I don't have a lot of hobbies because Old Raleigh's my baby and I like blending whiskey. And I created this beautiful thing to where on Saturdays, we've got people that will drive. 2 weeks ago, I had a couple drive 5 hours from Charleston to
Mhm.
spend 2 hours with us and they were going to drive 5 hours back. Now think about that. I created something where these people
Mhm.
could be anywhere in the world and they decided to spend their Saturday with me. Like
Yeah.
what a blessing is that?
They they drove from effectively the beach to further inland, right? Like that's like you got, and they came north, so they got colder, right? Like all of the things that is a thing you definitely should pat yourself on the back for because Charleston's a beautiful city and there's nothing wrong with Raleigh, but they drove 5 hours to come to see the whiskey brand, not to come to see Raleigh specifically, right? That's something. That says you have something.
Yeah, and I could talk about whiskey all day long, right?
Hmm.
So that too, like the festivals, they're a grind. You meet several hundred people, but
Yep.
I can't help myself. You want to talk about how I made it? I mean, you spent your Saturday, you want to learn about bourbon. I could
Hmm.
be a broken record for 5 hours. I could say the same stuff. I mean, I just can't help myself. I'm like,
Hmm.
let's talk, let's nerd out, let's do this.
So you mentioned festivals. Are there festivals you habitually attend, or is it just as it pops up, you say, I'm gonna be able to go to this one, this one, this one?
Yeah, I've done the North Carolina Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Fest circuit. I do all those. The ones in Virginia, we just got into Virginia as well. Did the Palm Beach Food and Wine Fest last December, and so we'll continue to expand as our footprint in stores and
Mhm.
retail expands. We'll probably follow that with that circuit just because it's a good community of folks, and I really like those type of festivals.
And you just mentioned beer, right? And North Carolina has a pretty good beer scene. Do you do any work with beer finishes, beer casks? You know, share casks with beer companies.
Yeah, I've got one aging right now. We work with Tarbanks Brewing, and they had one of our honey cask finished bourbon barrels. They made an imperial stout that they aged in there for I think 6 months. They just harvested that. They gave us a 6 stole beer that we're selling that at the tasting room here. We
Mhm.
then imparted a bourbon back into that cask, and we'll be releasing that towards the end of the year when it's a little colder.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that when it's a little colder because that feels that just the words of it tell me this is a cold winter whiskey. You know, it may not be when it tastes, but just the brain says that because it's an imperial stout, which is not a lean summertime sipper to begin with. It's going to have some honey on the back end of it. You got to assume. So you're able to sell the beer in your tasting room along with the whiskey. That's an interesting thing. And you mentioned some. I think you mentioned a wine finish earlier, maybe that you were working on. Or that you had already released, maybe?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a Spanish orange wine
Mhm,
that was actually a bottle club bottling. I think it was at 96 proof. We did
mhm,
one last year that was at 110. It's so funny with the as you meet consumers like those that just are the proof hounds that want
mhm,
hazmat 140 proof. And you got folks barrel proof's king, and then you got folks just getting into whiskey that are can you make some stuff around like 90, 95?
mhm,
So we do a nice balance of that. But with that one in particular, last year we did a release around 110, 112 proof. This one though, I went as a blender, I want to give you the best expression of this cask finish. And it was
mhm.
at 95. And the complexities on it, dropping it down, allowing that orange wine finish, which orange wine's a lower proof than a fortified wine. And so I found that dropping the proof allowed for that cask finish to sing a lot more. And thus we gave two different outcomes of that particular product.
You know, cask finishing can be pretty divisive on certain types of casks. Are there some casks out there that you're like, I'm absolutely never going to work with this particular cask, or ones that you haven't yet that you really want to?
So white wines, not big in much into them. I've had like a Chardonnay cask finished bourbon and was not very impressed with it at all.
It was almost like it wasn't that well. I don't know what you had. I've had a Chardonnay cask finished bourbon as well, and it was almost like, where's the Chardonnay?
Yeah, and maybe Chardonnay is just not a good pairing with
Hmm.
bourbon. I remember in 2019, I got my baby wine sommelier certifications from the Master Court of Sommeliers. That was actually down in Charleston. But my motivator for it wasn't to be a master of wine. As a blender, I just wanted to know a little bit
Hmm.
more about the wines and cask finishes and fortified wines, etc. But I remember at the end of that, I actually passed the exam. I was talking to a master sommelier who
Hmm.
taught it. And I asked him, I said, hey, if you were to do a cask finish for bourbon, what would you do? And he said Chardonnay. And my takeaway from that was just because you're a master taster in one spirit does not mean
Going to translate over the other one, and it could the one that I had was by a mass production company, and so maybe they didn't put a lot of thought into it. They just said, "Hey, we're going to bottle this up and we're going to sell it." It just wasn't impressive, and I've hoped for someone to do something better because I would like to see what it's like. I mean, I want to try any cask finish that exists and decide whether it's good or not, but I need to know that cask had an effect for me to know if I liked it or not, and I couldn't tell. I just couldn't tell.
So I think somebody out there is going to make
Mhm.
a great one. And I'm not speaking negatively about that
Yep.
cask finish for those brands. If you're making one, that wasn't my intent. But I think if I'm given some options right now, there's
Yep.
a lot more things I'm more curious about and
Mhm.
actively exploring than, let's say, a Chardonnay.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of interesting wines from other blenders and other brands that are looking at doing finishing. And obviously we don't name the ones that no one's ever done before because you're not trying to tip your hat and say, "Oh, hey, I'm trying this wine here," and then somebody else is going to try to get to market with it and, you know, dilute your opportunity or whatever. But North Carolina also has a pretty vibrant wine country as well. Do you look at any of your more regional wines and say, "Hey, I'd love to look at a partnership here"?
I haven't to date, and primarily, to be honest with you, I've just been so buried, my head buried in Zebulon, and I've been able to just establish some really cool relationships globally with
Mhm.
casks that I find just naturally interesting that I haven't gone down that route. That's not
Right.
to say that won't happen, but I just haven't bumped into the right owner operator at a festival to start a
Mhm.
relationship. That's where a lot of the genesis of what I do is I meet somebody, I find them interesting. They have their own craft. It's an opportunity for me to learn something new about somebody else's craft, and then the story just starts from there.
Yeah, and I know especially with with smaller producers, it can be difficult to work out cask management because maybe they may have a good quantity of wine, but they may be bringing it in, or maybe they're really only doing 2 or 3 casks a year, right? They've just been around for a little while. We are kind of running up against the edge of time here, Brandon. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about from Olde Raleigh that you're like, hey, I really wish he had asked this thing? Because if so, now is the time to talk about that.
Just one thing came to mind, and that is that when we got the release for Olde Stogie in 2 weeks, I think we touched
Mhm.
on that. But two, at Olde Raleigh, we really doubled down on blending here. And
Mhm.
so one of the missions that we have right now is we want to be the first brand to release 1,000, over 1,000 one-off releases of cask finishes.
Yep.
So right now I've got that was called Project 1,000 Blends. From a consumer standpoint, it's called the 1,000 Blends Challenge.
Mhm.
And so every week I'm releasing 3 one-of-one bottles of different cask finishes,
Oh.
combinations, etc. You can try a flight of that. But the purpose of that is for experimentation. As a blender, it allows me
Mhm.
to radically go up on that learning curve of learning about how different flavor components come together. But those that come in and experience it, well, we got a QR code, provide us some feedback on what you think of it. I think we started it last year on number 83, 84, 85. And so we've
Mhm.
had actually several folks come in here and they're actually going to be on 83, 84, 85. So they're trying it as well. But that would, if you're into something a little different,
Mhm.
one of one bottle and just a little experimentation, that might be something to come check out.
That's like I guess at that pace, that's like a 6 or 7 year project. Is that how long it's going to take you to get to 1,000 blends? If you're doing what you said, 3 a week.
Yeah, 3 a week. That gives
Mhm.
us what is that? 156. So actually, I'm going to release over 181 different releases this year between
Okay.
the 1,000 Blends project, our limited releases, our member bottlings, our standard offerings. It'll be 181 different releases.
Okay, so you're still in the 3 to 5 year time frame, depending upon if you speed up or slow down or whatever. That's
Mhm.
that's an impressive feat. There's somebody out there that would like to have all 1,000 of them, but that's going to be impossible to do to keep up with. I mean, they can give it a shot. I'm sure you'd be more than happy to let them give it a shot. That's really interesting. Are you kind of tracking the finishes and saying, okay, here's one, two? Yeah, I assume you've got a spreadsheet somewhere that's got all 181 that you do for the year with no intent to repeat, or you're going to have to be able to do some repeats in there.
But no repetition. And so for me, it's that term master anything.
Mm-hmm.
The only way you master something, you at home, if you're listening to this, you're watching the video, how did you become the best accountant? How did you
Right.
become the best hairstylist? How
Mm-hmm.
did you become the best teacher? All right. Yeah, you got your certification. That was great. But when did you become the best? It's when you got the reps and you got the experience.
Mm-hmm.
So that word master blender, yes, I own that title. But from my end, I want to showcase that on a daily basis that I'm outworking every other blender in the world, which
Mm-hmm.
sounds like a bold statement, but that's my goal. As an owner operator, I've got the ability to make that decision. 10 years from now, when I look back on my breadth of work and I've done 20 some hundred releases,
Mm-hmm.
well, I think my experience and that track record, will speak for itself in terms of my ability to blend. And I'm already seeing it right now. Like when we're starting to package things together, I was just
Mm-hmm.
talking to my wife about this, I think 2 or 3 nights ago, is I can already tell if I'm rolling in with a cask finish,
Mm-hmm.
dropping it 2 or 3 proofs going to make this difference because these notes are going to pop and this one didn't at this proof. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing already how I'm starting to see the dividends pay on it.
And this is just a data nerd part of me because I spend a lot of time working with that and my day to day job. For every 3 blends that you finish, there's going to be a number of blends that probably aren't going to go into a bottle because you're going to test out. It's not going to work. I'd love to see the trend over time of like, in the beginning, maybe it takes you 5 blends to finish one. In the end, maybe it takes you 2 blends or 1 blend to finish. Like you're just nailing it every time. Kind of see if that tapers off as you get to the end of your 1,000. That's just an interesting data point. Sorry, I'm stuck on the data of it at this point. But yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. It is a repetitions game, and doing the same thing over and over and over again. And it's not the exact same thing, but the same process over and over again. That is how you get really, really good at something, right? And blending. I don't know too many people that are going to put out 200 blends in one year, or 81 blends in one year. I'm rounding numbers up. I don't know anybody that does that. That sounds crazy. Just it sounds like a fantastically crazy idea.
That's why it's good not to have shareholders because they would tell me what I'm doing is nuts. They said, "Spend all your time getting into 3 states."
Yep.
But again, this is it's about the art of blending and truly mastering something, and that's
Mhm.
what I'm on a mission to do.
Yeah, it's a master's course in blending. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really interested to see what happens with Old Raleigh over the next few years, and the opportunities that you guys have to be able to kind of broaden your footprint. I think will benefit anybody. You have one of the most beautiful bottles in the marketplace. Period. You know, there's a lot of folks that search out certain bottle shapes, and they should be looking for yours if they're not.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it. Thank you. The time open invitation when you're in Raleigh. Come see me. We'll pop some barrels and have a little fun.
We'll see you soon. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up what's going on here. Yeah, I can also be found I can be found at www.embellishpod.com. It's all of my links, accounts, contact details, and even some articles about cocktails or music or whatever it is that I happen to feel interested in talking about. Thanks for stopping by.